I have a few housekeeping announcements that we're going to go through quickly. This is our final day, and we have a great session with the mini conferences with Dr. Todd Hannaford, who's going to be speaking in a minute. We'd like to extend a special thanks to our bronze sponsors, CONMED, Corsa Medical, Gore, and Meshucher. Make sure to join us in the closing award ceremonies and business meeting at 12:30 p.m., where we will be announced the winners of the research grant and the Hernia Olympics and other meeting awards. Your CME credits can be claimed online or through the meeting app. The deadline is October 29th. And all certificates can also be through the same link. And get your cowboy boots ready for the 2025 annual meeting that's going to happen in September 4 to 6 in the Nashville city. So without any more delay, she'll be introducing Dr. Hannaford.
Hi, everybody. He wanted to do the announcements just so he could say the cowboy boot thing. I'm Courtney Collins. I'm from Ohio State. I love the people who show up at the morning session of the last day. You guys are like the true believers. I appreciate that. So our first speaker, I think most of you are probably familiar with, this is Dr. Hannaford. He is the professor and chief of GI minimally invasive surgery at the Carolinas Hernia Center. And he is going to talk to us about AI and the robots that are taking over.
Taking over the world. It's interesting. Of course, most everything that I do well is done by our young people. And if you look at all these pictures that are on this slide, I just asked Chat to draw pictures of robotic surgery and AI in the future, and it just printed all these out. It's really quite amazing. So this is my disclosures, and these are the people who are responsible for anything that you see that's worth a damn that I ever present. It's because of these people. So artificial intelligence is the description of artificial intelligence. It's not new. It was first described by Alan Turing in 1948, and no one would publish this article until after he died. And then the next report he put out was Computing Machinery and Intelligence in 1950. And what he described is truly machines imitating the thought processes of humans, and then mimicking humans, and then being able to replace humans in 1950. And he came up with the Turing test. And essentially what this was is all would be written, all the questions would be written, all the answers would be written, so you couldn't see who was responding. But as soon as a computer could respond like a human to another human, so you got two humans, one is the tester, one is participating, and then the computer. And if the computer can answer the questions just like the human and fool the evaluator, that's artificial intelligence. Described in 1950. And Ronald Reagan said Goliath, and essentially he was talking about, of course, the Soviet Union and how this control would be brought down by David of the microchip. And indeed, computers and technology have brought that down. There's an article, first a small book, and then it republished this book by the director of engineering, and essentially said that AI is pivotal technology. It's going to drive our ability to take care of diseases. It's going to help environmental degradation. We just need to get out of the way because artificial intelligence is going to make every aspect of life better. Mark Andreessen is a billionaire, and he said essentially exactly the same thing. Everything that we care about will be better if we just let AI take over. And we have a moral obligation to ourselves and our children and our future to allow AI to help run our lives. But then, of course, there's the consideration of like AI going crazy, running it, because artificial intelligence, essentially what it will do is you set the parameters and then it will just go. There was an interesting report where they surveyed 2,700 artificial intelligence experts, and 1/3 of them said there's at least a 5% chance that human extinction will happen due to artificial intelligence. And of course, there's a book by Nick Bostrom, who is the director of Future Humanity and Institute. And if you read this book, one of the things that scenarios he goes into is like you have someone who's running a paperclip factory. And this owner just sets up AI to run the paperclip factory, make as many paperclips. The only directive is make as many paperclips as possible. And what happens is it's without appropriate guidance, this artificial intelligence essentially takes over the world, kills all the humans because we don't want all of these paper clips, all the resources of the Earth and then starts harvesting asteroids. Its only directive is to make paper clips. And so this has actually been well quoted, and it really is pretty scary if you think about it, that it destroys humanity because it had no guidelines. And Elon Musk, of course, talks about, this is more dangerous than nukes. But indeed, he says this, but he says that he will have 1 million robots for us to do our simple household tasks by 2030. Of course, the United States government has weighed in on this, and this is from last year, this kind of blueprint for AI and a Bill of Rights trying to protect what we do and who we are and humanity. And then this article that came out from the American College of Surgeons essentially saying that AI is here. There's no question. It's just a matter of our using it for the betterment of humans. And I think this is absolutely correct. No matter what we do, artificial intelligence is here, and we're not going to be able to turn it back. It's just a matter of us using it and using it appropriately. And again, some of these pictures like ChatGPT, I just asked it to draw pictures for me like this, really quite incredible. And then the crazy thing is it'll do this in like literally 10 seconds. And these are yours. I mean, you print these, and I said, now I wanted robotic surgery, and I said, how about a human robot? So it made robotic arms on a human doing hernia repair. And then, of course, this is my dog. And I said, make my dog into a Jedi. That's pretty incredible. I'm like, and so artificial intelligence in surgery has really taken off over the last 10 years. 100-fold increase in articles per year in artificial intelligence in surgery. But a lot of this, and I'll talk about it in a second, a lot of it is truly artificial intelligence. And one of the young guys that we work with, Jack Kavanaugh at MIT, essentially said some of these articles that claim to be artificial intelligence, are really just a linear regression in a trench coat. People want to call it artificial intelligence, but it truly isn't. It's just math. New England Journal of Medicine last year and JAMA started, and also the Lancet, the most important journals in the world, have started journals about artificial intelligence. They've gotten out in front of this. And so this is here to stay, and it's now being evaluated at the highest levels. MIT has a 16 CME credits on artificial intelligence in medicine if you want to sign up for this with MIT. But is it better? And I think it has to be. This is a traditional way that we disseminate information in surgery. And like yesterday, we had a conversation about an article that's super important in the way that we manage patients in hernia repair. And in my discussion of that article, someone who's read that article read it completely differently than I did. So I can hand every one of you an article and say, I want you to input this in your practice. And many of us would do it very differently. And so how do we actually take data like this? This is from Katie Schlosser when she was in our lab, and she can do all these crazy, beautiful pictures, and she can come up with, here are the things that will lead to component separation, paniculectomy, fascial closure, operative time, predict those things that lead to increases. But what does that actually really mean? As my daddy used to tell me, as far as percentages for me, it's either 0 or 100%. But being able to use information like this and input it in your clinic, can you really do that? This is an article by John Fisher looking at CT scans and all the predictions in CT scans and a roundup of the literature. But really and truly, what does all this mean when you're standing in front of a patient? Can you input patient information and actually do something about it? I'm going to show this again by Katie Schlosser, looking at patients who had developed pulmonary failure. She used CT scans and used objective information to try and predict the worst outcomes. And the reason I show this is because what we built on, and actually Charbel El-Haj and Celia Uzo in our lab built on, this is a foundation by what Katie did with traditional means. And you could take this information and you can say who's high risk, who's low risk, but high risk is, for pulmonary failure, is greater than 8%. What does that actually mean? Data like this, predicting surgical complexity. This is the Carbonell method of predicting surgical complexity of whether you would need a component separation or not to get the admin closed. This data is more direct by doing measurements, mathematical measurements, but still it's about inputting it. And in this article from MIT, they talked about, indeed, it's really about coming up with applications that makes data actionable. In this lab that was started at the Mayo Clinic, looking at predicting outcomes, and this is the richest area in medicine, not just surgery, to improve care. This is an article that we did, and I mentioned, I'm sorry about these slides cutting off and on. If we can talk about artificial intelligence, we can't get our slides to run. This is an article that was done by Igor Belinsky, where he had over 2 million data points. And once you get over 2 million data points, then you can start to really predict outcomes. But what this did, and we made an app out of this, was the first surgical predictive app in the world. And Igor did this when he was in the lab. But essentially, what he did with this is this is just a complex mathematical equation. If you guys want to write this down, here's the backbone of the app. But it's not artificial intelligence. It's just linear regression. But now, if we came out with this, people would probably say this is artificial intelligence, which it truly isn't. The same thing with this app that we came up with. It's just a complex mathematical equation done by some really smart kids in the lab. This is the group that a lot of the data that I'm going to show you coming forward it comes from this group right here. It comes as Jack Kavanaugh from MIT and two of Will and Alexis from our lab. But artificial intelligence, again, is not a new concept, and artificial intelligence in medicine is not a new concept. And indeed, this was first described in medicine in 1970. It's just taken us a long time to get there. Two main types of AI in medicine: machine learning, where you input data. The computer trains itself looking at this data over and over and over again. And then it makes predictions, or language processing, of course, like with ChatGPT. Where AI is now working, or should be, or will be working in the future in surgery, and predictive analytics. And you'll see some of this stuff in just a few minutes. You know, this like patient-specific modeling. This is pretty cool when you can get 3D animations done by AI looking at all the patient information. You know, one of the things that will happen, absolutely will happen, is robotic-assisted surgery. Hasn't happened yet. Right now, the robot is just a tool. But artificial intelligence helping you with this, like real-time decision support, like being able to look at tissues, tell what tissues are, touch tissues, sample tissues, be able to identify what tissues are. You're going to cut something. Do you really want to cut the common duct? You know, much like what airline industry is now. I spoke with one of the guys who trains the American Airlines pilots. And he said, you know what you need to fly an aircraft now? Is a pilot and a dog. And I was like, of course he baited me. What's the dog for? To bite the pilot if he touches anything. You can input now in the planes, you input like you're at gate E27 in Charlotte and you want to go to gate B14 in Paris. It will back the plane up. It will go to the runway. It will take off. It will fly. It will land and take you to the gate. The only thing the pilots are there for is gates of emergencies. And that's what they train for over and over again, is the emergencies. At some point, yeah, no worries. At some point, will robotics actually perform an appendectomy for you? And you're like this guy said, all the pilots are Sudoku champions. Will that happen? Not in my lifetime, probably. But will it happen? Absolutely, it will. The other considerations is like AI and imaging. You know, our charity supported a study looking at prostate cancer and predicting stage 3 cancer outside the gland. And Sully Ayuso trained the guys down in Florida at Celebration Health how to do this. And so what AI does in that case is you input, there was 1,001 patients, their information, their MRIs. AI looked at those scans over and over and over again. It knew what the path was, and it continued to look at these scans until it got it 100% correct. And so one of the studies that we did, and I'll show in a moment, is that computer ran all day and all night looking at 300 patients, CT scans, until it got it completely correct. But with that, in the study that won the American Urological Association Research Award, It actually predicted better than 3 qualified radiologists. Is this happening? Absolutely. Like in surgery, using ultrasound in surgery and having AI help you look for the common duct, look at tumors, look for tumor margin, that will happen. Post-operative care and predicting complications, that's already happening. One of the cool things, is, if you haven't seen it, is remote monitoring of patients. And so like nursing shortage and things like that, patients can be monitored in the hospital continuously. And then also patients can be monitored at home. For the elderly, for the homeless, this has real applications. Personalized medicine, that's self-evident. And then one of the cool things too, that the really good things that are done in California, at University of California in Loma Linda, is surgical training and simulation. And also grading young surgeons in their, automatically grading young surgeons in their laparoscopic cases and giving them a report card is now being done by artificial intelligence. This one thing that is being done now is looking at, in certain hospitals, is looking at OR efficiency, predicting case length, what things will be needed in the operations, and those sorts of things. I think that AI and robotic platforms doing telesurgery, where AI can help stabilize long distance operations, going to happen, is already happening. We've talked about natural language processing, and everyone's seen that, but it can dictate your operative notes as you go. Answering common questions for patients. Great study done by the guys from Brazil and New York, in that, which I'll show in a second. And then, of course, in surgical science, one of the things that that our guys in the lab have done, and I'll show, is like using ChatGPT to write your abstracts, using ChatGPT to do your statistics, using ChatGPT to write your papers, using ChatGPT to actually grade abstracts for national meetings. It actually is possible, and we've actually done that. But if all the things that I described in this article in JAMA, where are we now as far as like scaling and adaptation? In that red box, essentially nothing is checked. This is all on the way, but will happen. There is certainly the consideration of dangers in AI in healthcare, and there are lots of articles about that. And so one of the considerations is like people using ChatGPT and inputting patients' real information. And you think, well, I'll just delete this. AI never forgets. And so there's been big warnings about this in the UK, and that young people, especially young surgeons, putting in real patient information, and you shouldn't do that. The other consideration is who's accountable, who's in charge. Of course, there are AI programs that say, here's the artery going to the gallbladder, here's the duct going to the gallbladder, you transect the common duct. Is AI responsible, or are you responsible? And that needs to be worked out. One of the other considerations is, if you think about the problems that we have in healthcare now, is you think about healthcare and where we labor shortage. Being able to have nurses, replace nurses, and those sorts of things. Is that going to happen? The answer to that is, it is. The other consideration is learning. Is this going to replace learning? Are people actually going to really study, learn surgical sciences, or are they just going to pop on ChatGPT and get the answer? Supplementation of information, I think, is great, but learning the information first will be super important. And again, the government is getting involved in this. The Senate's held hearings on this, and I think all of this is certainly very important. And I don't have a lot of time, so I actually will close without showing a couple of these studies, but what about the American public? And I think one of the things that it shows with the American public, of course, the American public doesn't know much about AI. So this just comes from what their initial thoughts are about it. But in this great study that was done with 1,400 average Americans, 60% would be uncomfortable with AI participating in their care. If you look at, is it Black? Is it white? Is it the age? There's really no discriminator between Black, white, and age. People who are better educated seem to be more comfortable. People who know more about AI seem to be more comfortable. So it is an education consideration. And then, its perception on outcomes. Do you think it's going to make a difference? Most people say, it's kind of 50-50. But one thing they do say is that this will negatively impact their relationship with physicians. That AI will start taking over their healthcare, and this one-on-one direct delivery of healthcare, the relationships will be negatively impacted. So how about with surgery? 60% of Americans say they don't want AI involved in their operations. But again, a lot of this has to do with education. A lot of this has to do with like just talking to patients and walking them through how I'm still in charge, but this is just going to help me deliver the best care possible. Can artificial intelligence improve hernia repairs? You know, this one article that this was the first predictive study ever done using preoperative CT scans to predict outcomes in the world. Charbel El-Haj and Sully Ayuso did this. They did an amazing job with this. They took CT scans, they inputted this, allowed the computer to read these CT scans over and over and over again, as I mentioned, until they got it 100% correct. And then they used 20% of 360 patients' CT scans, inputted that as a test group, and they did beautifully here. And what they found was we could predict pretty darn well patients who would need a component separation, predicted surgical infection amazingly well, but couldn't predict pulmonary failure. And if you look at when we tested on the right side, you will see a test of the computer versus 6 well-known surgical experts in the world looking at CT scans and predicting who would need a component separation. The surgeons were really good. They got it right 2/3 of the time. The computer got it right 84% of the time. Statistically better than the surgeons. Really, really quite remarkable. Did not predict pulmonary failure as well, but this is just the beginning. And so I'll stop here just because of time. I have a few more slides, but just because of time, I want to stay on time. But I think that this is surgical and artificial intelligence, the use of artificial intelligence surgery is here to stay. I think that we have to embrace it. We just have to control it. And thank you very much.
Todd, can you stay for the questions at the end, or you want to get the, yeah, all right. You come up with us. Thank you, Todd, for a wonderful AI, and we can discuss this in a minute.
Our next talk is virtual. So this is by Neil Smart out of the Royal Devon and Exeter Hospital in the UK, talking about biostatistics and AWS and how and why are we doing it wrong? Cross your fingers.
I'll be recovering for the next couple of weeks. Hello, many thanks for the kind invitation to speak to you today about biostatistics and abdominal wall surgery. I'm very sorry not to be able to attend in person, but I'm about to undergo my own major thoracoabdominal surgery, and I'll be recovering for the next couple of weeks. I hope to be with you again next year. So it's 30 years ago now that Doug Altman, who was the professor of medical statistics at Oxford University, wrote a seminal editorial for the British Medical Journal, where he opined that what we actually need is less research, better research, and research done for the right reasons. Not just because of his position in Oxford should we pay attention to what Doug wrote, but also because he's probably the most cited researcher in our field of bioscience and clinical research, with nearly 1 million citations. I think we have to take what he says very seriously. He's not the only person who's put forward such opinions. John Ioannidis from Stanford University also wrote an editorial some 10 years later about why most published research findings are actually false and that the quality of clinical research just isn't up to standard. So things haven't really improved over a significant period of time. To understand the question of why, I think we first need to understand the what is it that we are doing wrong. There are many common errors and they're often repeated by surgeons and researchers across multiple fields. We need to learn to recognize what is not right before we try and understand why this might be happening. Now, we could also title this talk, The 7 Deadly Sins of Statistics in Surgery. What I aim to point out to you is that I'm not a statistician, and I don't think you need to be either to understand that there are things that are going wrong. You do need is some common sense. You need to understand that there are rules that need to be applied, and you need to have an awareness of the process of the design, conduct, and reporting of research. So, number one, I think the first of the deadly sins is people who use statistics when you really don't need to. And the commonest place is in qualitative data or studies. And a good example of what things should look like were published a couple of years ago by colleagues from the European Hernia Society, who had looked at patient views surrounding hernia surgery. Now, what's important in this, in my view, is upfront. When they were talking about patient views, the first thing they did was include patients as part of the research process. And the 4 patients who are listed as authors on this paper have gone on to publish several other articles relating to hernia surgery. It's done well. And you can see that in the table that describes who the patient participants were, patients are listed according to their characteristics in terms of whether they were happy or unhappy with the hernia surgery and other characteristics that they have from a demographic perspective. There is no statistical comparison between the groups. And that's in contrast to something that we saw very recently, published only last month in hernia, where a paper from Denmark looked at the clinical consequences of burst abdomen after emergency laparotomy. And you can see there, in the initial table describing the demographic factors, you can see that there's a comparison between the 2 groups, and the authors cite the stroke reporting guideline as a reason for doing this. Well, that's funny because if you actually look at Strobe as a paper, Strobe's very clear about what it says, in that inferential measures, such as standard errors and confidence intervals, should not be used to describe the variability of characteristics. And importantly, the significance tests should be avoided in descriptive tables. That's not what the authors did. So I wonder why they thought they were reporting according to Probe. So when they've actually done the polar opposite. The second deadly sin is using the wrong statistics. And that can occur for all sorts of reasons. There are very clear guidelines that exist now about how you should report in biomedical journals. And the sample guidelines were again written by Doug Altman and published some 20 years ago now. And there are a number of common errors that are made, and I'd like to highlight a few of them for you. First is when people take categorical variables, and that's things like ASA or GCS. Rather than reporting the proportions in the different categories, they try and treat them as integers and report arithmetic means. And a classic example of this is from the Rich study that was published in 2013. In Annals of Surgery. So at the time, it was the top-ranked surgical journal and a hugely influential paper across the field looking at biologic mesh use. But you can see that the authors report a mean ASA score. And you can't do that because ASA, although it has categories of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, the ordinal numbers that were assigned to those categories are not true integers. They don't behave mathematically like integers. An ASA of 4 is not twice as bad as an ASA of 2. They are not related by standard intervals between each category. Those categories could easily have been named after colors or dinosaurs. The mean of a T-Rex and a Stegosaurus is not a Triceratops. It doesn't work that way. So you can't do arithmetic mean of ASA. It's very difficult then to think about how you might interpret the more complex statistics that the authors have done when something so fundamentally has been done incorrectly. Continuous data. So we do have continuous data. There's often a temptation to try and divide it into categories. Say you've got a change in practice, think about pre and post change. Now, that really doesn't work. And it's the same for things like height or for biochemical measurements that have got a normal distribution. What we're better off doing, particularly for time-based series, is to use things like statistical process control. But again, it's not been widely used in the surgical literature. But the work case series published over a decade ago, which actually have used statistical process control to look at changes, and this is relating to emergency laparotomy, of which some of the patients were emergency laparotomies for hernia. So it can be applied to our field. I suppose the final thing is the abuse of p-values, which is very common in biomedical research generally. And a great paper that was published by some colleagues of mine in Exeter about 4 years ago now, looking at those abuses. Now, what they highlight is that the p-value in the null hypothesis significance testing is conditioned on the fact that the null hypothesis is true. And that sometimes isn't the case. And there are a lot of errors in the reporting of what a p-value actually means. Further editorials have been written in many surgical journals on this topic. And again, a colleague of mine at the journal I edit has published a fantastic editorial on the role of p-values and how they're influenced by the size of studies. So worth looking at, and I commend them to you. So one of the great challenges that occurs within surgical research generally, and particularly within hernia research, is that statistics that are used are often not well understood. That's not a great surprise. These common problems arise because there's confusion around the terms used, and they're often not spotted in expert peer review, because most of us are clinicians who do peer review, and we look at the clinical aspect. We don't look in detail at the statistics. You need a dedicated statistician to review complex statistics. Now, the editorial boards of all of the major hernia journals do not have a statistician on board. If you look at the high impact factor journals in surgery more generally, like JAMA Surgery, BGS, Annals of Surgery, you'll see that they each have dedicated statisticians as part of the editorial board who are there to do the reviews of the more complex statistics and some other papers. And I think that's a commendable step forward, and we need to look at that in our own field. Common issues occur particularly in cohort studies or large data studies, particularly where observation studies don't have published protocols on the whole compared to, say, randomized controlled trials. I think increasingly that situation is changing, and certainly in the colorectal sphere where I also work, there has been a move towards the publication of detailed protocols, including statistical analysis plans for large prospective observational studies. And so one of the greatest challenges we faced when looking at this type of study is that we see selective reporting. You have to have open and transparent reporting, not cherry picking or fishing for a significant p-value. If you see that, alarm bell should ring. But we should be looking at an obvious rationale if you're including factors in analysis. There needs to be a good clinical reason why, and it has to be biologically plausible. Looking at things that aren't particularly relevant but may have a significant p-value doesn't take us forward. For example, surgeon glove size. Common things that are misinterpreted are risk ratios and odds ratios. In general, risks look forward, odds look backwards. And so we often see inappropriate interpretations of what has been described in a paper. We often see problems as well when interpreting the results, looking at effect sizes and confidence intervals. And really what we need to be reporting is that we don't find differences when we look at the statistics, rather than trying to use fancy words like equivalency or non-inferiority. And we also need to be bold and state when we don't have the data to make meaningful comparisons. Frequently that doesn't happen because people are fishing. One of the things that is more challenging for us as surgeons is because most of us have not done extensive education in mathematical and statistical sciences from the age of finishing high school, is that we can end up with very powerful software programs like R and Stata, and we can end up doing complex statistics badly. And the old aphorism about a fool with a tool is still a fool is probably never more relevant than here. And just because you can do something doesn't necessarily mean that you should. And that's where expert statistical input into the conduct, design, and reporting of studies can really come to the fore. When it comes to multivariable analyses, there are some really good papers out there that are good primers or introductory lectures to what it is that we should be looking for and doing. And again, I commend them to you to read. They highlight some important factors, and one of the things that is most commonly done in hernia research is that when doing a multivariable analysis, often the analyses are overfitted. You need a certain number of events to the variables that you were looking for, and commonly the rule of thumb that's been used has been a ratio of 10:1. So for example, if you have a cohort of 200 patients, of whom 20 actually end up with the outcome of interest, the number of variables that you can realistically look at with any great statistical accuracy is only 2 in your multivariable analysis. But how do you choose them? Well, so commonly we see a univariate analysis done, and then people taking the factors that are significant at a variable cutoff level, and that might be cutoff level different from the usual 0.5 that we normally see. It might be slightly more broad to include more things. And actually, again, that's a fishing exercise. All of the statisticians will opine that the preferable way to select your model and the variables that you're looking at is expert clinical reasoning, because we should have determined up front what it is that we are trying to look at and what is clinically and biologically plausible. Other things that are commonly done with large data sets are prediction models, and where people try and have some equation that they can use to try and predict what will happen to patients. Now, it's been estimated in certain reviews that 85% of these prediction models have actually used the wrong statistics. One of the commonest reasons is that what we see is that you have a continuous variable and there's an artificial or false dichotomy applied to it. And what no one tests is whether the relationship between that variable and the outcome of interest is linear consistently across all ranges. It might not be. It might be a non-linear relationship. And again, we don't have to look very far to see inappropriate examples in the hernia literature, published only a couple of weeks ago in the journal Hernia, looking at trying to predict postoperative seroma after TAP. Again, it doesn't look like the authors had read our Strobe statement and have included inappropriate p-value comparisons between groups in table 1. But more importantly, what they've done when trying to construct a nomogram is that they've taken a dichotomy on a continuous variable, in this case C-reactive protein, at 8 milligrams. So I don't quite understand why they've chosen 8. There's no biological reason for why 8 rather than 7 or 9, and they've incorporated it into its nomogram. I have to say, this strikes me as very odd. There's no clinical reason given for it in the paper, but it smacks, to my mind, that this might not be as robust methodologically as one might hope. And we often see examples of things like mammograms and these false dichotomies in papers produced by paper mills from countries like China, Iran, and indeed Russia. I would have great caution about using this in any sort of clinical context. Getting slightly more controversial, one of the other 7 deadly sins, propensity score matching. It's become very fashionable to use. But this fantastic editorial that was published 2 years ago now by Richard Stevens and Jason Oake from the Department of Medical Statistics at Oxford University, successors to Doug Altman following his untimely death, have highlighted how badly most propensity scores are done. The issue with propensity score matching is that what it can't cope with particularly well is unmeasured confounding. You can only deal with that which has been measured and reported. And it doesn't deal very well with missing data. And you can take very large data sets, and after propensity score matching, you can actually leave out 90% of your cohort. So there's lots of valuable information that you then don't have. How you do your matching is often not described well, and there's a complete lack of transparency. And in the author's view, propensity score matching is overhyped and overused. So if propensity score matching is the ray gun of the statistical world, what is it that the professionals are using? Well, the answer to that is instrumental variable analysis, which can be thought of the flip side of the coin of propensity score matching. Essentially what it does is uses the natural experiments in treatment allocation as a way to try and estimate causal relationships in large data sets when randomized controlled trials are not feasible. You do need very large data sets. So normally that means data collected from national registries, statewide data, from electronic patient records and such like. Often these data sets have hundreds of thousands of patients in them. They have been widely used across biomedical science for several decades now, particularly in public health, epidemiology, but also across education, economics, and widely in the medical field, but much less so in surgery. If you want to know more about them and about the actual complex statistics behind them, and I have to say it's way above my level of understanding, there are some great papers published in the Journal of Clinical Epidemiology some 15 years ago with an excellent special edition published, and it's worth a read. The story of instrumental variable analysis is worth noting because they have been used to great effect by our medical colleagues, particularly in cardiology, and the entire sea change that happened in the management of acute myocardial infarction back in the late 1990s and early 2000s, where they moved from the use of thrombolytic drugs like recombinant TPA towards direct access to catheter labs and stenting, was based on the differential outcomes seen between propensity score matching and instrumental variable analysis. It was practice changing, and we've seen dramatic improvement in results long-term as a consequence. The use in surgical fields, particularly in hernia, has been much less common. But recently we saw this paper that was published from a group in Michigan looking at the surgical approach in long-term recurrence after ventral hernia repair. It created an uproar in some social media fora because it was not particularly supportive of robotics as a technique. Now, some of the accusations that were made in this online fora were actually quite wild in terms of inappropriateness and ineffectiveness of the peer review process, even relating to some more outlandish comments about the quality of research. Well, I can assure you that what's actually been done in this paper is very high quality. You might not like the outcome, but it has been done correctly. I have to say, it's not the first time that instrumental variables have been used in hernia surgery, but it went under the radar previously. I published a couple of papers back in 2022 that used instrumental variable analysis looking at NHS England HES data and about whether surgery was actually useful at all in hernia management in the emergency situation? And the answer is, from a cost effectiveness perspective, in patients who present as emergencies, it might not be greatly useful from an economic standpoint in those who are very frail, are very comorbid. And that's largely because their quality of life is not impacted by repairing their hernia. They have got other fish to fry, other things that determine their quality of life. In terms of the clinical outcomes, it's slightly different. Usually it's only at the extremes of old age or frailty where surgery doesn't have anything to offer. I received none of the comments that were posted in social media fora against that paper from Michigan. Randomized controlled trial sample sizes are probably one of the greatest problems that we face. I will state up front what is happening when it comes to funding of research by Europe's largest funder, which is NIHR in the United Kingdom. They've long since tired of funding small randomized controlled trials and using the concept of it's just a pilot study or a feasibility study to justify poor methodology and low sample sizes. Those days have gone. The power that is required for most high quality randomized controlled trials is 90%, not 80%. And it pushes us to a situation where if we are comparing two straightforward treatments, A versus B, the sample size that we are looking for is at least 400. And there's no trial that's been funded on the NIHR portfolio of A versus B that has a sample size less than 400 in surgery. Frequently, the sample sizes are in the 1,000.
Could you do me a
And there are
favor,
recent
please?
studies
sir?
in surgery that they have funded
you
looking at
just
surgical site infection.
Stop the video
Often
for a
had
second.
samples.
I apologize, but in an order of time, we have 10 more minutes and we have Dr. Hennifer here. Todd, if you want to come over this side, you can have all these lectures will be available online. So he still has about 20 more minutes in there, at least. So Todd, thank you so much. And I'm sure there's going to be a lot of questions. So feel free to ask him, any initiatives or.
Well, I'll get the ball rolling. Thanks, Todd. ChatGTP is very good. First of all, I'd like to, on behalf of all of us, wish Neil a speedy recovery after his surgery. It is interesting because I, like you, peer review a lot of papers, and I have confessed I'm starting to use it to help me peer review. But a lot of these papers are possibly written by ChatGTP.
Right.
Do you think that's acceptable? Do you think we should allow it, and how can we police that?
Yeah,
That's
so
the first question.
I think that's a very apropos question. And so I can take both sides of this argument. First, I think like our young people need to know how to process information. They need to learn about statistics. They need to be able to do the statistics. They need to be able to look at data, decide what's important, be able to write what their thoughts are in 250 words in an abstract, and then write what their thoughts are in 11 pages. And there's definitely something to being able to tell a surgical story. I think that's super important. The other consideration is, if I want to take the other side of this, is I have very important information that I want to give to this audience. Very important information that I believe will impact the way you take care of patients. What is the best way for me to get that to you? And if that's ChatGPT, then so be it. So we can set up a debate. We can go either way. One of the considerations with chat, and I didn't get to it. I had like 4 or 5 more slides. I just wanted to stay on time. Is that our young people did is like writing abstracts. So how good are the abstracts? And this is a paper that Alexis just published in JAMA about 3 weeks ago. Super interesting. And so what we did was we took 6 international surgeons who've graded abstracts for decades, for at least 10 years, for national and international meetings. And so we took the data, we gave chat 10 abstracts that we had previously written, right, Alexis? 10 abstracts we had previously written to learn how to write an abstract. Then gave it 3 articles that was related to the data that we gave it. We gave chat, here's our data, and write an abstract in 250 words like the 10 abstracts that we taught you with. And then we blinded these 6 people, took a junior residence abstract, took my abstract, ChatGPT 3.5 and 4.0, and gave it blinded to people to review and to grade. And there was nobody that was better than anybody else. And indeed, Chat 3.5 and 4.0, Chat 4.0 did better than 3.5, but not statistically different. And I was not better than Chat, and that hurt my feelings a lot. But then the other thing that we also did, that in an article that's being reviewed by Annals right now, that Will Lorenz did, that hopefully will be out, is that, so how do we eliminate bias in grading abstracts? You know, you send me an abstract. I mean, I know you're like a world's expert, but I'm jealous as hell of you. And so I'm not going to put you in the plenary program, right? Because I'm biased. And so how do you eliminate that bias? And so, and also too, so the consideration of, like, for young people, you know, I put all my friends, you know, on the plenary program, and I don't put you on the plenary program because I don't know you. And so how do you eliminate that? So what Will did with Alexis, and I mentioned Jack Kavanaugh. Jack Kavanaugh, you can take Chat and use that as your artificial intelligence, you know, kind of background. You can use that as your board, and he can. Jack is an expert in this, and he wrote code. And so what we did was we took all of the American Society of Plastic Surgery, most important plastic surgery organization in the world, the largest in the world, their top 100 abstracts from 2021 and 2022, taught Chat to how to grade them. These are the ones that are the most important. These are how you grade them in a 20-point scale. Gave him all the abstracts from 2023, and he could grade those abstracts. We also did it for the American Hernia Society. 1 year, top 100 abstracts, grade these abstracts and put them in order for us. And do I think that will happen? 1,000%. And I think it should happen immediately. You know, you should grade the abstracts, and you should grade the abstracts, because you guys, you know, got your finger on the pulse of what's cool and what's happening. But to eliminate bias, we should use Chat to do this. And I love it. One of the other considerations about Chat, like having Chat write papers for you, is, and I love this example, and I should put that slide up just so you can see it. There's an article that came out on peristomal hernia repair in Sugar Baker. And this was 2 years ago, or a year and a half ago. And they asked Chat to write this paper and reference it about Sugar Baker. He gave 12 references. They were all made up. All hallucinations. So you got to be very careful. And so, and also, and again, I didn't show that one of my last slides, is I actually wrote in the Chat, and I asked Chat to find an article written by Nadia Hendrickson and Lars Jorgensen saying that drains improve outcomes and for hernia repair. Immediately it comes back and says, it gave me 2 articles which were not from the Danes. I'm like, no, please. So if you actually will talk to Chat and say, thank you, and please, and my life depends on this, or my job depends on this, it will make shit up for you. So I said, please, this is super important. I have to have this article. It completely made the article up and gave me the reference. I mean, pretty cool, but scary. So Chat, long answer. Do I think we should absolutely use Chat to grade abstracts and help eliminate bias? Absolutely, I think we should. But like writing papers, I can take the argument, but on either side of this. But, for 30 years, I've trained young surgeons to write and to be cognitively aware of data and how to move data to influence people. Instead, it may be, and there's no question. And so, and I would just say that, so Neil Smart, and one thing artificial intelligence will never do is Neil Smart is one of my best friends. And you'll never replace that with artificial intelligence. But in my conversation with him on Sunday before surgery, he said that all the editors of the major journals in the world get together at meetings, and their #1 concern is ChatGPT and the flood of articles that are going to come in because you don't take the time it takes a lot of time for you and I to write an article, and Chat will write it in 3 minutes.
California, it was Dr. Brian Jacobs.
Yeah.
But I don't
Well,
know.
his influence does extend over there, I guess. So, or maybe it says something about hernia surgeons in California. Sorry, David. Sorry, David Chen. Can I? Yeah.
I think that another important thing is how to avoid the plagiarisms, because it is
Right.
Plagiarism.
Because it
Absolutely
is
correct.
impossible to differentiate a manuscript do by ChatGPT that written by you. It is impossible nowadays.
Uh,
How to differentiate? I think that the problem is very, very complex, very complex. Not only with ChatGPT, because nowadays, in my opinion, we are living in the age of immediacy. We are living in a world where constantly we are being told to sell ourselves.
Right.
I mean, self-promotion, to be louder, to be more visible. How to avoid that? I think that we need education from the beginning at the young people and the young surgeons on how to handle the artificial intelligence, because the artificial ChatGPT is catching the data from the internet. The
Yeah.
science will death in the future, because who will be investigating things? Because the number of data in internet is limited.
Let me ask you a question.
But to your point, like plagiarism, ChatGPT will absolutely plagiarize. And you dump it in and you'll have no idea.
You have taught us that we have followed some landmark papers that are worth nothing. What do we do from now? Because we have all these years of research, and you have proven to us there's a relative value of how credibility of that's been happening. We're getting conclusions where we shouldn't even have those conclusions.
Right.
Where do we go from now? And if this artificial intelligence will allow us in the future to get up a paper and says this is worth nothing.
I think that first and foremost, and like what Neil was talking about, is like, first you need to read the paper. And one of the conversations we had yesterday is, and what people do is they read the abstract and they come up and say, well, this is what the deal is with this paper, and it's absolutely not true. And Neil talked about like Mike Rosen's paper on biologics and ventral hernia repair, when 64% of those patients were parastomal hernias. And so, first, a lot of it's our fault because we don't read the paper and we don't pay attention. Our attention span's about this long, and we just read the abstract and go on to the next paper, or don't even read the abstract. We just read the title and the conclusion and go on to the next paper. I think having artificial intelligence, like to be able to sift through this and like to be able to grade. So what will also happen is that like when you'll review a paper and you'll review a paper, and then chat will review the paper and be able to go through all the statistics and all these things that Neil says that we don't do as reviewers, as clinical physicians. Chat will do that, be able to sort that for us. And it's not just chat. Of course, there's, Microsoft has theirs, and there's Gronk from X or Twitter. And so we're going to have lots of reference points in this.
So I think we're running out of time, but
Yeah.
I'm going to leave Todd with this last thought. I don't know if it's education or human mind, but 50% doesn't want AI to help them in surgery, but 1 out of 5 Americans will accept having sex with a robot. Thank you very much.
So, Right.